Welcome to Salaam Nerds Podcast. We do reviews and recaps of nerd culture, reality TV, and current events from this week.
Yo, it's the Salaam Nerds. My name is Dean, aka E1-4, and I'm here with my boy Chad.
We drop live episodes on YouTube on Sundays, Tuesdays, and Wednesdays at 10:30 p.m. Eastern. All episodes can also be found everywhere podcasts are found. Thank you to all our supporters. Please help us by subscribing and leaving a good review on Apple Podcasts and Spotify.
Yo, Salaam Nerds. It's your boy Neebs, aka Watch with Neebs, and I am here with our special guest who's been on the show many times, friend of the show, Swara. Welcome to the show.
El sila eren lu govaned vin.
Donde está biblioteca?
No, I was saying something in Elvish. A star shines on the hour of our meeting.
Ooh, I like that. Guys, we have a special treat for you. We are doing Rings of Power. I know 4 episodes or 5 episodes have already passed, so we're doing a little bit of a catching up. So we're going to try to do at least 4 episodes today and get through it, and then we'll do the rest at another time. But we wanted to bring in an expert, or someone who is as close to an expert that we could find, and that's Swara, and he's interviewed a lot of people from this season. You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I had the opportunity for Nerds of Color to interview Morpeth Clark, Charlie Vickers. They play Galadriel and Sauron, respectively, and I am Haladriel trash. I was so happy to interview them, and specifically about Haladriel, even though as an avowed Tolkienite, I know he would probably turn over maybe a bit in his grave about this, but let's I can't wait to get in the show. But anyway, I got to interview them, the actors who play Celebrimbor, Arondir, the actors who play King Gil-galad, and a couple of others. Oh, the actor who plays what's his name again? The leader of the orcs, Anar, I believe his name was. And it was just really fantastic to have that opportunity, and I'm really honored, and especially to speak to Morpeth. She has been, as we've discussed privately, really vocal for Palestine, Palestinians. She's wonderful, and it was really great.
We love that. Also, your pronunciations are off the chain.
I told you, I'm a Tolkienite. I am obsessed with, I actually was taken by my mom when I was 11 or 12 to see The Two Towers. I actually hadn't seen the Fellowship of the Ring, but I became absolutely obsessed after watching that film, and then Return of the King, and then I went back and watched Fellowship of the Ring. Then I read the books, and I've read the Silmarillion, and I probably have watched the films, the original trilogy, 25 times at least throughout my lifetime. I love those films, Peter Jackson's vision, so much. And I love, obviously, Tolkien and everything he wrote, and just obviously there are differences between the books and the movies, and I love them both for their own reasons. And Tolkien, he was honestly ahead of his time. Doing more research about him, he was, I've always known him to be an avowed environmentalist. And people make fun of him for you take 3 pages to describe a tree. Why not? Trees are amazing. Trees are beautiful. And he was also kind of an avowed anti-imperialist. He hated the British Empire. He was why are we spending our time taking over these lands throughout the world when we should just be cultivating our own nature here in England, in Britain? And just he was ahead of his time. Sure, he may have had some bordering on racist depictions, especially with Easterlings and whatnot, but potentially the orcs as well. But the thing is, it's that was still a product of his time, and just think that we still have so much to learn from Tolkien and his works, especially today.
Yeah. I feel like the show kind of just dived into that even more, because there's things that we see where it really challenges from what we've seen in the movies. I remember seeing an orc with a baby, and I was like, oh, what?
Yeah.
Like it's like, oh wait, we gotta think about that.
Some nuance, actually. Yeah.
Sorry, my headphone came off.
No, there's
Yeah.
there's nuance in it. Yeah.
Yeah, sort of like that. So let's start about talking about the show. So the episode starts off and it confused the crap out of me because I'm like, who is this blonde elf? I don't know who this person is. I didn't recognize the actor because like they're so good with like the makeup and stuff. I was like, oh,
No,
they recast it.
No, yeah, that's a different actor playing
Yeah.
Sauron. That's the thing about Sauron. As a Maiar, he can take many different forms, and he often does. So
Yeah.
it makes perfect sense that it would be someone else before, the orcs in that moment betrayed him.
Yeah, so it took me a second to figure out like, hey, what's happening here? But the scene where the orcs betray him, I thought was fantastic. The way they show it, the way they show where they're like, hey, this guy is not really one of us. What are we gonna do? And they kind of just like, little Caesar moment where they kind of stab him in the back a little bit.
Adar stabs him. Yeah, I got his name wrong earlier. I used the Farsi word for pomegranate instead of his name, Adar, not Anar. Adar.
Oh yeah, yeah, we call it Anar too.
And in Kurdish we say Hanad. Yeah.
I love me some Anar. You know what I do? I actually take Anar and I take cherry tart, and then I put a banana in the blender with some ice, and it's the most amazing drink. And sometimes I throw a little protein powder in there because I'm trying to get swole.
Nice.
But it's so good. Highly recommend. I'll make it for you one day. It's very good. It's a very delicious smoothie. But yeah, I thought that was really cool. The way they kind of just stabbed him, and he's just like dying there, bleeding out, and then we see this pool of blood that kind of just trickles down the rocks and until it hits the water, and you're like, okay, what's gonna happen here? Is this Venom? Are we seeing Venom? And he's just like a symbiote, and then he gets a rat, and you see him like slowly getting power, and then you're like, okay, so this is how Sauron fell and how he came back. They're kind of putting the pieces together, and we kind of see that, and then we see that he kills this lady, and then he takes the shape of what's it, Hellbrook, right? And Halbrand, right? And that's the person that we remember, and how he got to the ship that he was at, and how he met Galadriel. And I'm like, oh, I really enjoyed the retelling of that. I didn't know they were gonna go back and actually show us all of that stuff, but I thought this was a cool little prequel moment, and it's a great way to like just jump back into the lore and the characters and everything. What were your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I thought it was really fascinating. I am fascinated with the depiction of Sauron, throughout Tolkien's works. And again, he can take any form. The Eye of Sauron thing, I gotta go back to the source. That was something made the Eye of Sauron is a concept in the books itself, but it's more like a symbol. It's the Eye of Sauron, like the symbol of Sauron that he sees all when in the books, while he did have his physical form destroyed when Isildur cut the ring from his finger. The thing is, in the books, he actually gained another physical form, but a much weaker physical form. So throughout all of the books, he's just like in his tower in Barad-dûr, where he's just trying to, command his armies, but he's not strong enough. Like, he needs the ring. Whereas in the films, he's this giant flaming eyeball having no physical form, which I think is really cool and great in adaptation. But again, there are significant differences between the books and the films. Now, going into this, it all makes sense because in the Second Age, Sauron took on a fair form that we see in this season named Annatar, the Lord of Gifts, passing himself off as an emissary of the Valar, who, now in Tolkien's Legendarium, you have Eru Ilúvatar, who is God, and Eru Ilúvatar created the Valar and the Maiar, who are basically classes of angels. Now, the Valar are the high angels. I believe there's around 12 or 14 of them, and the Maiar serve under them. They include people like Gandalf. Gandalf is a Maiar, come to Earth as one of the Istari, or wizards, as did Saruman before Saruman fell. And Sauron is also a Maiar. So they can, these are immortal spirits, like taking a form, trying to influence events in Middle Earth. So yeah, effectively Sauron could take on any form, but particularly for around this age, in the Second Age, like taking on this fair form, first as Halbrand, still as Halbrand, but then saying he's Anatar with the blonde wig, which much more resembles like descriptions of Anatar
Right.
in Tolkien's works. By the way, another thing I gotta tell you, something the Rings of Power does, which I'm sure I'm sure pisses off quite a few Tolkien fans, is it condenses a lot of history.
Okay.
So the stuff you're seeing with Numenor around the same time of the forging of the rings, that takes place like hundreds of years later. And the show, for dramatic effect, and
Right.
Sauron being at the center of both of these events, like it just like set them more closer together. So it's so funny for me with this series because I really enjoy it a lot, both as a Tolkien fan and just as an enjoyer of good TV. But
Yeah.
I also totally understand why like other Tolkien fans wouldn't like it, because it does diverge in certain significant ways from what Tolkien actually wrote and
Yeah.
laid down. And I will say, so I've actually seen up to episode 7. I just haven't seen the finale. And this season, without giving much away, it does take some divergences where it's just like interesting for me to like judge this as someone who's so deeply invested in the work. Like I still really enjoy the season, but I'm also like, I see where this could have been better, or where this could have adhered more to what was in the Legendarium. So I know, it's an
Interesting.
interesting experience for me, but I love what they're doing with Sauron. Like Charlie Vickers, he's a brilliant actor,
Yeah.
and he's clearly having the time of his life. So yeah, that's my favorite part. I think Sauron may be my favorite character.
Yeah, so the first Sauron is a different actor. Then we get Charlie Vicker, and now we get Charlie Vicker in a blonde wig, right?
Yes,
Is that's what it
yes,
is? Okay, but
yes.
he is an elf now because he has like elf ears.
He's passing himself off as an elf, I believe. He's either, so the thing is, like, an emissary of the Valar would typically be a Maya or Maiar.
Right.
So he may be trying to pass himself off as an elf, or
Yeah.
maybe for like audiences to understand that maybe he is just an elf, because there are elves in Valinor.
Yeah.
So perhaps like Celebrimbor assumes that one was sent to him by the Valar in whatever way. So he's either Celebrimbor, and the other elves in the region think that he's either an elf or a Maiar.
Got it. Okay. All right. And then in other, well, actually, you know what I want to talk about? You talked a little bit about how you feel about being like a Tolkien fan and how they're diverting from the stories. Now, the show has getting a lot of mixed reviews and viewership is dropping. Do you think it's because of these reasons, or is you think it's more because of like people are just being toxic and they don't like people of color being in these like fantasy things, and or do they, because like when it comes to the acting, I think the acting is fantastic. I think
Is.
the production is fantastic, and I see people making fun of that, and I think they're kind of just like lashing out because they don't like it for other reasons. I remember they were talking about like the armor from the movies and then the armor from the show, and they're like, well, the show is spending so much more money, why is the armor not looking as good? And people are like, well, that is war armor and this is sailing armor. They're different. So like
Right.
some of the stuff that people are criticizing, I feel like is not valid, and then some of the stuff I feel like it probably is valid, but it's hard for me to shift through what is and isn't because I don't know the lore as deeply as you do.
So, anything that's inordinately criticizing any character of color, we can throw that out. I mean,
Yeah.
just point blank, period. Like, we've seen this again and again where it's just like racist. And there are, of course, things you can criticize about characters of color if you're doing it in like a subdued way and you're actually listing down things. But if you're just like, I hate Arondir, I just like don't, then you're probably just an anti-black racist.
Right.
So we can throw that out. In terms of, dipping viewership, we have to remember that this happens a lot with shows in general. Like
Mhm.
second season is always going to have less viewers than the first season,
Mhm.
especially with like this being a seminal event of like a new adaptation of
Yeah.
the Lord of the Rings, effectively, or at least through the appendices, because it's confusing. So we have to know that like the Tolkien estate is working with Amazon and New Line Cinema on this adaptation. So
Okay.
this has the buy-in from Tolkien. It's not just like, oh, we're selling this to y'all, do whatever you want. No, the estate is involved.
Okay.
But at the same time, they are taking these divergences, which honestly, I will say, like, initially, like, people may have, like, tried to think of this as, like, oh, this is, like, a prequel to the Lord of the Rings trilogy that we saw. And it is and it isn't. It is
Yeah,
obviously a prequel to the Lord of the Rings in
but not a
general, like books, but not to Peter Jackson's trilogy because this has a
right.
different look. This has a different feel. The Rings of Power themselves look very different.
Yeah,
When I
yeah.
saw that, at the end of the first season, I was like, oh, they may be switching some things up or mixing some things up. And that's kind of what you have to do with any TV show because you do
Yeah,
want
it's
to keep
an
the
adaptation.
audiences. It's an adaptation, exactly. So, but at the same time, I do think, because those films are so well revered, because obviously the books themselves they're
Yeah.
holy in a lot of ways to fans. It has a lot to do with just like, audiences' expectations and how they just are approaching the material and such, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the right way to go about it because then you can do whatever you want and not have to worry about being canon to Peter Jackson. So it basically doesn't have to jive with the way they did stuff in the movie because it is, even though it is a prequel to the events from the movie, it's not a prequel directly to that version of the movie. So I totally get that. I think that makes sense. I think that's the right way to do it. And that's why I think like the people complaining about it's not canon, it's not that. It's like, well, it's not. It's an adaptation. It's one of the many interpretations of like how the story can go. I don't think it needs to
Yeah.
be like Star Wars has everything has to be canon. We're in one timeline. That's it, right? I don't think it needs to be that way.
Like
Um,
I have to tell you, like I at one point was thinking I would be fascinated to see their take on Lord of the Rings proper,
yeah,
and maybe have that be a series that's different from Peter Jackson. Although at the same time, the films are just they're peak.
yeah,
You're
they're
not gonna
peak.
beat them, except for them being like almost all lily white. Like
Yeah.
it's just they're just perfect films. Honestly, they're
Oh my
amazing.
God,
I
you're
love those
right.
films so much.
I forgot how white they are.
They
They're very
are.
white. They're very white.
They're very white, but at the same time, like I think that us as people of color, like we see so much in the struggle of
Yeah,
these people as they deal against the imperialism of Mordor, against the
yeah,
industrialization. Like that's another thing about Tolkien. He hated industrialization. He was like, "This
yeah.
is gonna lead humanity to a bad place," and look at where we are right now. You
Yeah,
know?
yeah, that's true. That's true. All right. So let's move on to the story of Galadriel and Elrond because they're having some beef. They're not besties anymore. Because he figures out that her boy toy was actually Saruman, Saruman, and they're like, "Tell us what happened." And he was like, "Well, he betrayed us, and he's not coming back." And he's like, "Well, tell us why." And then she finally gets him to tell her because he found some information that gives him that information, and she's like, "Yeah, he was no man. He helped Celebrimbor make the rings." And then Elrond's like, "We got to destroy these rings. They're bad." Uh, and then we see at the end, basically this whole thing goes down. He finds somebody he can trust. He goes to dump him in the water in the abyss, and then he changes his mind and then brings them back. And then both the king and the guy Elrond trusted, I forgot his name, Cadrim, uh, he brought them back. And then you see one fall, and Galadriel puts them on. So the three rings are back in their hands. And you're like, ooh, this is interesting. And like, I like the fact that like Elrond was the one. He was the one who was right all along. They should have listened to him. Um, Very fascinating the way they went about doing this. How accurate is this from like the canon or the lore?
we don't get too much of how the elves received the
Hmm.
three elven rings of power, which are
Yeah.
Vilya, Nenya, and Varya, the
Hmm.
rings of air, water, and fire, respectively. It's more that they just got these rings that enhance their natural abilities to preserve nature around them, which is what we see in the show, and it was really beautiful to see.
Yeah.
Uh, the thing is, these rings of power helped, eventually, and this isn't a spoiler, like, Vilya eventually gets to Elrond. Nenya eventually is always with Galadriel,
Yeah.
and Narya gets to Gandalf.
Mm.
Akirdan, the shipwright who has Narya now, he's eventually going
Yeah.
to give Narya to Gandalf. And what these what I could say Vilya and Nenya do is their rings of protection and of uh cultivation of growth that help Elrond and Galadriel preserve and create and preserve Rivendell and Lothlorien.
Yeah.
Narya, as a ring of fire, has the power to inspire and motivate people around the ring bearer, which is what Gandalf does throughout all of
Mm.
his travels in Middle Earth. So that's all we really know about them from the text by and large. In terms of them being a potentially bad thing, that's not as delved into until the One Ring is made.
Yeah, because it seems like that's what
Yeah.
they're setting this up for. Because Elrond's like, "Hey,
Yes.
something's wrong
Yes.
about these ring. They're giving me bad vibes," and it makes a lot of sense. Where like, hey, uh, they are making these rings and people are using them, but now once you get dependent on these rings, they're going to basically s- m- make you work for them. They're gonna control
Hmm.
you. Kind of like us and Amazon. Like, hey, we got Amazon, and we're like, oh, this is so amazing. We can't live without it now. They got
I,
us.
I wouldn't, to be honest, I wouldn't make that exact analogy because what's happening now is that, as is explained in the first season, the elves are losing their essentially their grasp on being able to stay in and help preserve Middle Earth, which
Hmm.
is why so many of them are starting to go back to Valinor.
Yeah.
And effectively, this is all like a uh, pathway, as we see in the Third Age in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, for all of the elves to eventually go back to Valinor where they came from and leave Middle Earth to men and
Hmm.
let trust them to basically take care of the earth
Yeah.
and you know just like not mess it up, like
Yeah.
us humans are unfortunately messing up our earth right now.
Yeah.
Hopefully we can reverse course. And the thing that these rings of power did is that they allow the elves to prolong their stay in Middle Earth and again protect nature, protect their homelands, and in the process obviously help men as well as
Hmm.
dwarves and other beings of Middle Earth. So it's like the rings are a band-aid, a
Yeah.
centuries, millennia long band-aid for the elves to continue their protection of Middle Earth until they ultimately would have to leave, especially once the One Ring of Power would be destroyed.
Mm. It's kind of weird to see the elves and be like, we have to protect these people, and they cannot be trusted with rings. We don't know. It's like the way they look down on them is really interesting.
It's
Let's
very
talk.
paternalistic, yeah.
Yeah, it is, right? Let's talk about Gandalf or Istar or whoever is walking around with.
Okay, I'm gonna dive into this immediately. I
Uh,
really hope this guy is not Gandalf. um, what I hope this guy is one of the blue wizards. Now,
mm,
let me go back and explain this. So,
okay.
the Istari, I mentioned them before, these are five Maiar who were sent by the Valar to Middle Earth who come around the year 1000 Third Age.
Hmm.
When it's become more aware, the Valar are more aware, everyone's more aware that Sauron, even after losing the ring, is still out there. So the Istari or wizards are
Hmm.
sent to Middle Earth. Now, again, these are like angelic, amazing beings.
Right.
And the Valar specifically sent to Middle Earth saying, you cannot use your power, or
Hmm.
at least you cannot use the full range of your power to fight the peoples of Middle Earth battle for them.
Yeah.
You have to have your power dimension. That's why they, they start off like maybe middle age, but then like the Istari actually age, which
Hmm.
is why they're not like elves,
Right.
because they very physically age into like very old men. They're like wizards,
Hmm.
but they're also functionally immortal.
Hmm.
And you have the three wizards which we've seen in the films, Saruman the White, who is the head
Hmm.
of the Istari, Gandalf the Grey,
Hmm.
Radagast the Brown, who we see in the Hobbit movies, which are
Hmm.
movies I overall don't like except for the White Council scenes. Otherwise, those should not have been three movies. It should have just been one movie. This is based off
Yeah.
one children's book.
Valid.
Um, and then you have the two blue wizards.
Hmm.
And the blue wizards actually travel to the east,
Hmm.
uh, where Rune is, which is somewhere we
Yeah.
see in the season, which is like
Yeah. We see
kind
this.
of it was just kind of like the Middle East, North Africa of
Yeah.
Middle Earth, what we're seeing. Um, so this Istari that we're following now is way, way earlier than the tech. It's probably the biggest divergence
Hmm.
possible from the books. And because it's interesting, because it's like watching this, I'm like, this completely negates the canon we know of. But also, this guy arrived on a comet, so maybe
Yeah.
he's some sort of precursor to the Astari.
Yeah.
Um, the reason I hope it's not Gandalf is because I I don't know. I don't need to watch. And I love Gandalf. Gandalf's like my favorite character, but
Yeah.
I also don't need to watch his origin story and like have things laid out. I find the story of a blue wizard who came earlier to Middle Earth accidentally much more interesting, compelling, and maybe he's not a blue wizard at all. Maybe he's just a random Istari, but
Yeah.
or maybe he still is Gandalf. If he were Gandalf, maybe he is still Gandalf, and then he goes back to Valinor. And no matter what, I hope this guy goes back to Valinor at the end of the series so that he can
Mm.
come back in 1000 age, thousands of years after this point when he's actually supposed to, and then it'll make more sense for the canon. So that's my like bit of gripe, but also I'm like still very intrigued with this character and where he's going.
Yeah. I mean, again, like it may not be Gandalf, but we know wizards have, these relationships with hobbits or Hartford or what they call stoolies. I forgot what they're called.
I think they're called stores.
Stores, yeah.
Yeah, stores and yeah, the Harfoots. Yeah.
Stores and Hartfoot. So we basically see them. They're still traveling along. Poppy left them, but then she came back. So we have her back, which is nice. And then he gets his Moses on, where he makes the tornado and saves them from all these people. And then the Hartfoots meet the Stores, and we find out that one of the stores is actually the leader of the Hartfoots. He basically broke off and left to find something. He ended up never finding it and ended up just kind of turning them into this nomadic tribe. Whereas originally they weren't nomadic, they just like stay in one place. I thought that was really interesting. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I found it interesting. It's like I love hobbits, I love Harfoots, but also like I'm not the most invested in their history, to be honest. But I know I just found it interesting,
Mm.
that they were migratory peoples. I don't know. I guess like we'll see more as we go along. I like
I expected
Poppy
that to
and
be
Nori. Yeah,
I expected that to be more of a big thing, the whole stores being actual Hartford. But are these things not like things from the book? So we don't it's
it's
not a
like
big shock to us.
there are allusions to it of like the hobbits, like popping up one day, from Harfoots and
Yeah.
other like small peoples of Middle Earth and eventually founding the Shire. It's not, to my knowledge, it's not something that's heavily featured in Tolkien's novels, except, when you get to The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings,
Mhm.
knowing that these are the main protagonists and that even the smallest person can change the course of the future. And
Yeah.
it's a really beautiful thing.
What are your thoughts about the Istar finding Tom?
Tom Bombadil.
Tom Bombadil.
Oh,
That's got to be exciting.
so good. This is what I really loved. Like, yeah, Tom Bombadil, the man, the myth, the legend,
Yeah.
truly, in all sense of the word, just the most peculiar being in all of Tolkien's Middle Earth.
Mm.
Apparently, he is the absolute eldest being in Middle Earth.
Yeah.
He came before anything and everything that we know. The
Yeah.
ring in the book, so he's in the Fellowship of the Ring, and the hobbits meet him and they're bewildered by him. They stay with him and his wife for several days or so, or maybe a few weeks or so. And at one point, he even puts on the ring and nothing happens to him. It's
Mm.
like, it's not even there. There's so many like theories about him. The
Mm-hmm.
most popular one, I think, is that and it seems to be something like the show may be like hinting towards, is that he is actually an incarnation of Eru Iluvatar, the one
Mm-hmm.
god, and he just likes to hang out. However, this was a theory that was thoroughly rebuked by Tolkien himself, but it is also one that has persisted because fans are just thinking, what else or who else could he be?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe he's another Valar. Maybe he's an Maiar,
Mm-hmm.
or it's but the great thing about Tom Bombadil is just that he's such a happy-go-lucky character,
Yeah.
even when you know that he has some sort of deep cosmic power or presence.
Mm-hmm.
The thing is, he just is enjoying life, and he's just wants people to focus on the here and now and moments, and that's just such a wonderful thing. And he's a wonderful character who just inspires joy, like as weird as he is, as peculiar as he is, as this impossible being. That's not what's most important to him. The thing that's most
Mm.
important to him is like having a good life and being there for each other and kind. And I think he's really a brilliant creation by Tolkien. And I think the actor here did a great
I
job.
love the
And
actor.
yeah,
I thought he was
yeah.
fantastic, and
Hmm.
I love that they had the two actors interact. I thought the interaction was great. I love learning about the character, and it was really just like opening more layers because the Istar doesn't know anything. He's looking
Yeah.
for a staff and he's trying to get it off this tree that's actually living and it engulfs him. And he's like that's his path, and then he's trying to give him a little bit of direction, and he's saying, hey, am I supposed to fight Sauron? Am I supposed to fight this? He goes, yeah, you're supposed to do all of this stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's so great.
uh,
And yeah, they did a great job with him.
what about the dwarves and Kazakh Doom and
Oh,
all of the stuff going on there, and our homegirl Disa just
yes.
I love that. I think that's one of the most exciting things. I love the father-son dynamic and how stubborn
Hmm.
they are,
The
and
two
like
Durin,
yeah,
yes.
I think that's great. And you see his wife like over there trying to help him out, and she's like, hey, something's wrong here. We need to get light
Hmm.
here. We need to ever since the Mordor, Mount Doom, all that stuff
Yeah.
happened, they cannot get any light into their mountains and they have to figure out a way there. So usually they can sing and find light, and now they can't even do that. So they're
Hmm.
worried. And now he's got to work in the mines because his dad what you call it disowned him. He doesn't even have calluses because he's a prince and everything. I thought I loved all that. I thought the dynamics was
So
really,
good.
really good. And then that makes it so good when they're like, hey, we have to make these for the dwarves. And it makes sense
Hmm.
because they cannot make more rings without the material, and they cannot get that without the dwarves. So it makes all sense why they have to go and do that. And then his father ends up getting the ring, which I thought they kind of skipped around a little bit. We never saw the progression of like him going there and finding out about the rings. He kind of just like the episode, he just had it.
Yeah.
Uh,
I mean,
and then
they're relatively close to Region, so
yeah,
it makes sense that they would get them soon.
and
But
then
listen, but sorry, I just gotta say,
yeah,
like Disa, love her so
yeah,
much. I mentioned Sauron as my favorite character. Honestly, it's tied, or maybe Disa even a little more.
yeah,
Like the actress Sofia Nomvete, who by the way is Black Iranian, like
yeah,
just incredible, like amazing representation to
She's
see
so good.
there. She's incredible. Like
Her voice.
her voice. When I heard her sing in the first season, I was like, my God, this is
Yeah.
incredible. And her ferocity, like fiercely protecting her home, like she is coming at it with the energy of an Iranian mom who wants to protect her
Yeah.
family. It was
Yeah.
so good. And I just, yeah, I love learning more about the dwarves. I feel as though perhaps the dwarves in the original film trilogy were, I mean, especially through Gimli, were a bit one note.
Yeah.
I probably just pissed off a bunch of Gimli fans saying that. Well, Gimli may be my least favorite character, especially because of his actor, who's horribly Arab and Islamophobic,
Mm.
Arab-phobic and Islamophobic. Plays an Arab, as we discussed before, but anyway.
Yeah.
No, but I love what they're doing here and getting this insight. This is something Tolkien actually talks about, how the dwarves were driven by greed and riches,
Mm.
and the rings heavily like their leadership was driven by that, not dwarves in general necessarily, but
Yeah.
the rings, the seven dwarven rings of power, exacerbated this gold and mithril lust, like this
Yeah.
gem like lust, wanting to have all these riches and covet them for themselves. So yeah, it was really great to see that and see Khazad-dûm as this thriving dwarf city,
Yeah.
way before it was Moria. So like Moria is a name taken from the Black Speech of Mordor,
Mhm.
and it basically means dark place.
Mm.
And that's what it was called after a calamity, which we know is the Balrog of Morgoth,
Yeah.
or Durin's Bane, because this Balrog is going to kill one of the Durins.
Yeah.
And I think it may be their son or grandson that may be killed, who's not in this right now, but or at least shown as an adult dwarf. So it's fascinating that both with this and Numenor,
Mhm.
we're seeing these civilizations at their peak right before their fall,
Yeah.
all of which in some way or another ties back to Sauron as the grand master of it all, pulling all of these strings.
Mm.
And in many ways, Sauron is the protagonist of this series, because
Yeah.
what he's doing, him and Galadriel,
Mm.
he is driving all of Middle Earth to chaos through all his
Yeah.
machinations.
Yeah. I mean, he's doing a lot of manipulation, like the way he talked to Celebrimbor, getting him to do all these things that he wants him to do. It's so apparent how he's playing him, and he's coming off like it's their idea, to the point where Celebrimbor catches on. He's like, you're making me think these are my ideas, but they're really your ideas. And then you see how he manipulates all the other people that he's working with the young elf girl who puts on the ring and disappears. I thought that was very interesting too. So you could
Yeah,
really
that
see
was
him
great.
doing a lot of manipulations. And then even before that, we didn't talk about this, but he basically stopped all the messengers from getting to what you call it, Celebrimbor, because they never got the message that he's the bad guy. So I don't know. I think I really like the way they're showing his like gaslighting tactics and the manipulation and all of this stuff. It's
Go
really, really good.
gaslight gatekeep girl boss Sauron.
That's exactly what he's doing. And then we get to hear him say the rings of power, and it's like, oh, there it is. That's the name of the show.
No, but like in the second episode when he said, "The Lord, you shall be the Lord of the
Lord.
Rings," and he was saying, "Oh, like he said it, he said it."
I thought that was so funny. I was like, this show is the real Lord of the Rings, because we actually see the lords of the rings.
Actually, we see Sauron. He is the Lord of the Rings. He is
Yeah.
the namesake of. Look, that's the thing. It's like, it's so fascinating because it's all named after Sauron when he's the main
Yeah.
bad guy. But that just shows like how, because that's the thing. Sauron, he is scary. Like,
Yeah.
he's scary in the films.
Yeah.
As this giant flaming eyeball, but again in the books as this constantly unseen presence.
Yeah.
You know that he's alive and he has some sort of body, but
Yeah.
you never see him.
Yeah.
So that again, that makes him scarier.
It does. It
Like,
definitely makes
yeah.
him scary. Yeah. Speaking of scaries, how do you like the spider attacks when we find Isildur and the horse comes find him? I love that horse. Shout out to that
Yeah.
horse.
It was very like Brego and Aragorn in the Two Towers when Aragorn fell from the cliff into the river and his
Yeah.
horse saved him. So I like that. That was like a nice callback sort of thing.
It also gave me
Yeah.
vibes to the Never-Ending Story. I don't know if you saw that, but
Oh yeah,
they had the horse and then the quicksand, and I'm
I've
just
seen
like,
that scene. Yeah.
yeah. I was like, oh my god, they're gonna. That was really cool. You got to see the spiders. You got to see him come out of that. I thought that was cool. And then there's the whole storyline about like his dad leaving him for dead, and then he
Mhm.
goes back. And he lets the horse go, but he goes back. And then this whole stuff, the queen is blind now. And then she tries to have this funeral and she gets slapped. And I'm like, oh, how can she slap? Like, what is going on? The lady just slapped her. And she's being
Yeah, that
seen
was
as
nice.
this like like not a very strong queen. And you can see all these people conspiring against her, which is getting very like Games of
Mhm.
Thrones-y, right? It's like everyone's
Yeah.
kind of conspiring against her, and she's like, I see this eagle, and like, oh, if an eagle comes to your coronation, it'll be a very auspicious event. But when he does, the other guy takes credit for it. Instead, it just takes one guy to just start chanting his name, and they're like, oh, the eagle's here for you.
Farazon,
You
yes.
should be the king. And I thought that's
So
just fascinating how that takes place.
So, yes, this is canon where. So, by the way, Alfarazon and Tal Miriel, they're actually cousins.
Okay.
So, and she was the rightful ruler, and he usurped her throne.
Mm-hmm.
This is canon from the Silmarillion, from Tolkien's works,
Mm-hmm.
and he doesn't go into too much detail about that or Miriel
Yeah.
reigning that much at all, to be honest.
Yeah.
And yeah, Farazon actually, at least in the okay, so this is might be spoilers for
Mm.
later on. Do you want me to tell you anything
No,
or no?
no spoilers.
Okay, yeah, no
If,
spoilers.
yeah, let's not do spoilers.
Okay. So yeah, sorry. So like this is stuff I've known for like over like almost 2 decades, so
Yeah.
it's like it's interesting. Like I, have it because like this is stuff like us Tolkien. Not saying like we have any superiority or anything like that. I'm just like
Mm.
saying like this. Effectively, it's book readers versus like with show watchers. Same
Yeah.
vein as like
House of
House
the
of the
Dragon.
Dragon. Yeah,
Sure.
yeah, yeah. Farazon. It's not explained that much how he rose up. But what this show is doing very well is showing that divide between the faithful.
Mm-hmm.
So, actually, here's what I can tell you. Okay, so the kings of Numenor, they are descended from Elrond's brother,
Mm.
Elros. So, Elrond and Elros, their parents and their parents before them were human and elf. Like you had a human and elf pairing, Beren and Luthien, and Idril and
So
oh shoot,
Elrond is half human or half man?
yes,
Mm.
yeah. Sorry, Tuor and Idril. So Tuor was a human, Idril was an elf wife, and you have Beren and Luthien. Beren being human and Luthien being half elf, half Maya, but still effectively an elf. And they're the grandparents of Elrond and Elros's parents, Irendil and Elwing. So all of them and their descendants are at least up until all of their descendants basically until Elrond and Elros are the half elven, and they get to choose whether to be human or an elf. Now, by and large, they chose to be elves.
Mm.
Elrond chose to be an elf.
Mm-hmm.
Elros, however, chose to be human,
Mm-hmm.
and he became the first king of Numenor.
Mm.
And he lived into like his 400s or so.
Okay.
The people of Numenor having this overall descent, or at least the kings of Numenor having
Mm-hmm.
it, no, but Numenorians in general as well came to have it, like long life,
Mm.
because their rulers are descendants of the half elven, this noble house. So they have this tie to and humans in general should have as well this worship of the Valar, being true to the Valar, but especially those of Numenor. However, over time, Numenor, which by the way, I love the design of Numenor so much.
Yeah,
It's
it's really
so
nice.
it's so Mediterranean
Mm,
focused and inspired. Like you could imagine this like being Rome or Greece and
yeah.
having North African influences. I think it's
Hmm.
beautiful. Like the
They got indoor
diversity of
plumbing. They got
they
indoor
got
plumbing.
yeah. Yeah. No, it's amazing to see. I think they did a spectacular job with Numenor
Yeah.
because it's the peak of human civilization.
Mm,
However, as with most kingdoms and monarchies and empires in human history that we've seen, eventually some sort of corruption happens, and you have more of the people fall out of being the faithful to
mm.
to the Valar, to the old ways, to the elves who they are descended from.
Yeah, because they
So you
hate
have
the elves.
yeah,
They make
they're
it
very
apparent.
xenophobic.
And
Yeah.
when they found out that she was using the stone, that's like an elvish stone, that was almost blasphemous for her to do.
And you see Farazon, the hypocrite he is.
Hmm.
Oh wait, are we there yet? I'm not sure we're there yet.
No, I don't
Never
think we're
mind.
there yet.
We're
Yeah,
not there. Sorry, forget what I said. Forget what I said.
yeah,
Edit this out. Um, but yeah, you see this small contingent of Numenorians
yeah,
who are still faithful. They're led by Elendil and Miriel,
yeah,
and you have Farazon and his faction really just trying to sway the humans coming to humans sorry he's trying to sway the humans to want more power and to
mm,
reject the Valar, and
right.
yeah, it's awful.
Yeah, I gotta say, I really like the scene with the sea captain and how he was taken out of his post, and then his entire crew was still like chanting his name and saying, goodbye to the captain and everything. I thought that was really, really interesting. But the other thing I find fascinating is how his daughter is so against him. And I find that to be a very interesting dynamic. And also, I hate that character so much. She pisses me off so much in this show. The actress does such a
Yeah,
good
she's
job.
the actress is great, the character sucks.
Yeah. Oh my god, she does such a good job of making us hate her, which I think is really, really interesting. What are your thoughts about this family dynamic? And like, I feel like it's interesting because he's more for the queen. His daughter resents him because of like her
Hmm.
son, her brother got killed. Even though he's not killed, he's still alive. I think that's all very interesting, and I'm very curious to see how that plays out. I feel like that's going to be exciting when they eventually get reunited, or if they get
So,
reunited. We never know. I don't know yet.
well, I mean, we kind of do know.
Mm.
You saw the Lord of the Rings film, so this isn't
Yeah,
a
yeah,
spoiler.
yeah,
This is Elendil and Isildur,
yeah,
who will go on to fight Sauron in the last alliance of elves and men
yeah.
against Mordor. So, but yeah, on his daughter, I do think it's an interesting dynamic. I don't think she's actually mentioned in Tolkien's texts.
Mm.
She may have been a character made up, or at least, if she is there, she does not have any sort of role like this. So this is something very much made up for the show. I think it's fascinating. I think it's done really well, and I think it puts a lot of stress and strain on Elendil,
Yeah.
who is doing his best to uphold the faithful, and he's just such a great protagonist, and the actor does such a great job, and harkens back to Aragorn and the struggles he may go through. It's yeah, I really like it. I love Numenor. I
Yeah.
just you mentioned the Game of Thrones aspect. For me, it's just watching this amazing, beautiful society in decline
Mhm.
and seeing what leads to that. What is the discord that leads to that? How could these things have been avoided? How we have to stay vigilant against corruption,
Mhm.
against corrosion of our values.
Yeah, yeah.
So Tolkien, in many ways, I feel like this is Tolkien to a T. He was in a lot of ways, a traditionalist.
Mhm.
I was watching this really great video. I highly recommend this one Tolkien fan focused YouTuber. His name is Ink and Fantasy.
Mhm.
And for us, like, this may be a bit triggering, but he was talking about why Tolkien wanted monarchy over democracy.
Mm.
And effectively, Tolkien thought that in a democratic system where you're hoisting up people who are just power hungry, you're not going to be able to trust them, and that they're going to go for money and power as often as they can while they try to get these votes, which,
Mm.
like,
Not
hard to
half
argue
wrong.
with it.
Yeah, that's not half
Yeah,
wrong.
not half wrong. And Tolkien believed that a monarchy could be a stabilizing force by having this notion of family honor
Mhm.
and tradition that will hold society's morals together. Now, in the real world, we see where that leads us,
Yeah.
especially with the British monarchy that he was referring to.
Mhm.
He was a bit of an idealist there. But at the same time, I understand where he was coming from,
Mhm.
especially like in the midst of now, like, I believe in democracy.
Mhm.
I also don't think that a lot of purported democratic systems work as they're supposed to, or at least ideally
Sure.
supposed to.
Yeah.
But I understand the reasons for why that is happening, and it's rooted in what Tolkien was saying of like people being so power hungry and wanting to exert their influence as much as possible and to hoist themselves up. And in many ways, it's what we see with Farazon
Yeah.
in Rings of Power.
Yeah. Well, going back to Isildur, he also has this storyline where he's lost and he gets found. He finds this young girl, and then he finds, my favorite character, Black Legolas. He's out there shooting people, getting all that stuff. And then we find out that his girlfriend, or Theo's mother, had passed away, which I think they just had to explain because the actress decided not to keep on the show. She
Yeah.
went to Iran to fight for women's
No,
rights.
she
Something like
did
that.
not. She did not
No?
go to Iran. Nazanin Bonyadi
Okay.
definitely did not go to Iran.
What did what it was
She just,
something.
yeah, she just so Nazanin Bonyadi, she just is like very vocal about Iranian women's rights. And that's a lot of work she does, and for some reason, whatever, I saw her Instagram post and she said she made a whole post about leaving the show, and she said my
Yeah,
decision was not because of my activism work, even though that is my priority. It was very vague.
that is weird.
Yeah,
Because I'm like, if she's
it
not there and she's in the UK, she could still do her activism while being on the show.
right, and it's just like, I don't know. I will say Nazim Bonyadi is a very peculiar. In some ways, she is a peculiar person. I'll just
Oh,
leave it
okay.
at that.
Well, either way,
Um,
they killed off her character.
I feel like they should have just recast.
Yeah.
I think, and this is a problem I have with a lot of Hollywood today, in that I don't know if it has to do with actors' contracts, them saying like no one can play this role but me. Like, I
Mm.
feel like at this point it has to be that, because
Well, I know it was that for the X-Men movies. I don't know if you know that, but there was a rule in the X-Men movies
yes,
where you couldn't have other people play X-Men characters unless they
until
were
2025 or
Yeah,
so.
unless they
Yeah,
were de-aged, but if they were brought up to a different age, they had to go back to the original characters or the original
right,
actors. So
right.
it could be, you could be right. It could be a contract thing.
Yeah. We do know in the show that Adar was replaced from his actor in season 1.
Mhm.
So maybe it's not that. Maybe it's studio executives thinking, "Oh, audiences won't be able to tell, like, that this is the same character. We got like a killer." It's just like, no, please trust us. Like, listen, if we're gonna accept, going from Terrence Howard to Don Cheadle in the
Yeah.
MCU, we can accept anything. From,
Right.
like, come on.
Harrison Ford is now Thunderbolt Ross. Like, yeah, we can deal with it. Yeah.
Though we still boycotting that movie.
Oh yeah, that movie was still boycott for sure. In fact, I think we're not doing any Disney shows. I think Agatha we're also probably going to stay away from until after that movie comes out. All right, so we find out that there are people, men, who are loyal to Adar, and this
Yes.
woman happens to be one of them. And she makes up this story about her betrothed and how she's engaged and she's looking for him. And then you see Isidore try to get the hots for her, and then you find out that she's lying and she is part of, like, she was hiding her mark so that she could trick them. And then when they go to find the horse, they lose Theo. And then when they go find Theo, they find the ants. And I love that scene. I thought that was a really cool scene. That was one of my favorite scenes we've seen. And then one of the piece of people that were freed was possibly her betrothed. So that part was real.
Yeah. Yeah, I found that interesting. Yeah.
I was like, man, getting cockblocked. It was his own fault.
Oh, man.
What do you thought about the ants, though? I thought that scene was really cool. I really, really liked the whole interaction where he's like, have you taken an axe to wood? And he's like, unfortunately, I have, but with a heavy heart. And he's trying to, like, I was like, it was really good. I really liked the way they were like, they showed that.
Yeah, I love the ants. The thing is, we saw an ant wife. It's the
Yeah.
first time we've ever seen an ant wife, like, in the Lord of the Rings films and in the extended versions, like, which take from the books. The ents are like, we literally lost our wives. We don't know where they are, but we see them here, and it's so great. Yeah, no, I love the ents and just how they are the embodiment of Tolkien's love of nature. So it was great. So beautiful to see.
All right, so that was cool. I really liked that. I don't. We also see a little bit more of the orcs. I think we talked about earlier. We saw like an orc baby, and then we see like this big fella, Damrod. He came up, and I was like, "Oh, that's a big fella right there." And we see like there's more than just one kind of orc. There's so many different types, and I thought that was really interesting to see that we're diving more into them, because in the Lord of the Rings movies, they were just like mindless monsters, and here you see them as like actual, like an actual race. And I think that's really interesting to see. And they are, also like, hey, we deserve to live too. So I think that's really fascinating how they're diving into that. What are your thoughts about that?
This is really fascinating. And I got to ask the actor about this,
Ooh.
how Adar, like the actor, how
Yeah.
this is the first time in any Tolkien media we're actually getting depth to the orcs, and they're not just one note evil beings.
Yeah.
I do wonder how Tolkien would find that, because the point about the orcs is that they are a complete bastardization of the elves, created by Morgoth after he took some elves and like mutilated them so horribly. And we see Saruman explain this in the films, actually, to his newly created Uruk-hai.
Yeah.
And yeah, on the one hand, I know Tolkien would have hated this. On the other, I'm also fascinated, because it's good storytelling.
It is.
You're sympathetic to Adar and the orcs, even though they are the villains, but still, yeah.
I do like that. Like, I know, like, with Lord of the Rings, it works because, like, you are going to see so many deaths, and it's gonna be like, you see this huge battle, and you can't just like have like, you want someone just to be. You want to root for somebody when you have a big battle like that. You need someone to root for. You don't want to have these conflicting feelings in a movie because you don't have enough time to flesh them out, right? But as here in a show, we're getting that extra time to flesh them out, and I feel like it's worth telling. I think it makes it more complicated, but if they can pull it off right, I think it could be worth it. It'd be cool, and it also makes sense about like how they portrayed Sauron. They're also just not these like mindless people that just follow him. I think that's really, really interesting.
It gives them agency.
Yeah, I like that. Then we also see more of Gladriel, and she goes into this like weird cemetery of kings, and there's skeletons there, and there's like barrow wights, and they have to kill them with their own swords, and all this stuff that's happening. And then as that happening, you see Adar, you see somebody get stabbed, and she uses the ring to heal, and then she gives the ring away and has this badass fight with everybody, but then eventually gets caught. I think that was really cool. But one of the things that whatchamacallit, Elrond said, like, she didn't sacrifice herself. She wanted to save the ring. And I was like, That's like one of the things where you're like, we can't forget that these rings have a hold on people. They're not just like benevolent rings, right? So I
Right.
think that's really, really interesting. And I think later you find out like some rings are maybe more corrupt than others, and maybe based on how they're made, they're corrupt. So I think that's really, really fascinating that we're diving into this. So what do you think? Oh, you've already seen this, so I can't ask you what you think is going to happen with Galadriel, but I'll keep that to myself. I am very fascinated about Galadriel and Adar having a little conversation and trying to see if they have similar goals. I think that's going to be very interesting. I don't say anything. You don't say anything. That's it. That's all we're gonna say.
I'm just shrugging here. I don't know. I'm not saying anything.
Listen, Mr. Fancy Pants, I get screeners all the way up to episode 7. We're not as lucky as you.
Oh man, I am cursed with knowledge indeed.
Burdened with glorious knowledge.
Oh man. Well, I'll have a lot to say. Trust
All
me
right.
when we get to our
Get
second
to it.
discussion.
We'll definitely do more. Is there anything that happened in the first 4 episodes we didn't talk about that you wanted to discuss? I think we kind of covered
Trying to think.
everything.
I mean, I guess we could talk more about Celebrimbor specifically and his crafting of the rings and how Sauron keeps manipulating him.
Yeah.
And it's just such a brilliant, and the actor, I discussed this with him, like it's such a brilliant stroking of his ego.
Yeah.
Anatar / Sauron to Celebrimbor. So Celebrimbor's grandfather was the great high elf Feanor. So Feanor, this is back in the First Age, created the Silmarils, which are
Yeah.
these amazing, 3 beautiful, amazing jewels, which captured the lights of the 2 trees of Valinor, the
Yeah.
silver tree and the golden tree.
Mm.
Now, when Morgoth, who was originally a Valar named Melkor, full-on rebelled against the other Valar and killed Feanor's father in Valinor, he stole the Silmarils and he destroyed the 2 trees, along with the help of Ungoliant, who is an ancient spider demon that Shelob in Lord of the Rings is descended from. And when the 2 lights went out, like everything was pitch darkness. However, the Valar found 1 silver flower from. By the way, the 2 trees, they were called, I believe, Luperion and Teleperion, and those are the silver and gold trees specifically, if I'm remembering correctly. And there's a silver flower that was still left from Luperion, and then a golden fruit from Teleperion, and those became the sun and moon. The golden fruit became the sun, and the silver flower became the moon. So the Silmarils, they weren't necessarily as bright as the 2 trees, but they were still bright enough to light up all of Middle Earth. And the Silmarils, though, held all of the light in them, and that's what the Silmarillion, that's what that set of stories is all about. How Melkor, who Feanor cursed and renamed Morgoth, which means like dark enemy of the world. That's what those stories are all about, and about trying to get back those Silmarils. And Feanor, he swore a deadly oath to basically kill anyone who would get in the way of him and his sons getting the Silmarils back. The thing is, like, these were such brilliant, amazing, bright jewels that it's almost like Helen of Troy. Like, they launched armies, they launched a war to get these back until we could go talking all about Silmarillion. That's a whole other episode. And the thing is, Celebrimbor, as Feanor's grandson, has that burden of greatness on him. There's literally, you can see in the series, in front of Celebrimbor's tower, there's literally a statue of Feanor holding one of the
Oh,
Silmarils.
that's right.
Yeah, yeah. So he's trying to live up to that legacy,
Mm-hmm.
wanting to bring something so beautiful and amazing to the elves and to Middle Earth
Mm-hmm.
generally. And he does honestly already accomplish that with the forging of the three elven rings,
Right.
but his lust for glory and power keeps
Yeah.
growing, and Sauron takes advantage of that to be like, okay, now we should make 7 rings for the dwarves
Yeah.
and maybe 9 rings for men, and where
Yeah.
it's 3 times 3, and like
Yeah.
gets so easily manipulated. But you also understand that like he wants to prove himself in history, and that's the tragedy. He proves himself kind of for all the wrong reasons.
Yeah.
Honestly, still like his grandfather, who, like, by the way, Feanor, he was an asshole. Like, straight up. Like, this guy was like so up on his own juice, and just
Yeah.
like he told you, the Oath of Feanor was awful, terrible for Middle
Mm-hmm.
Earth, and like the Noldor, like the elves that he took to Middle Earth. And
Yeah.
uh it's a really like dysfunctional family at the end of the day.
Oh man, that's interesting.
Yeah.
That's really interesting. Speaking of Celebrimbor, I also forgot to mention the scene where they introduced the door, the famous door.
Yeah, yeah, it was so great. I love that.
Yeah. So like, I know a password that only friends would know, and we know the password ends up
Hmm.
being friends in Elvish.
Literally,
I thought that was really cool. I really like that. But
so
going
good.
back to the rings, one thing that I find really interesting is their refusal to give men these rings, which
Right.
is almost like there's a group of people they don't trust, and they don't want them to have a certain weapon of mass destruction. Is kind of giving that kind of vibe. It's like, well, you
Yep.
know what? We can't have these kind of people have these weapons. We must stop this country from having this kind of weapons, and we must. It gave me that kind of vibe. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
So I think yes and no,
Mm,
because the elves are functionally closest to the divine in Middle Earth, and they genuinely do know better in a lot of ways. At the same time, they are also paternalistic and arrogant. Like I was just talking about with Feanor,
mm-hmm.
like these are all mistakes by elves.
Right.
They're fallible. And that does beg the question, like, are you really the best ones to dictate whether humans should or should not have this power?
Yeah.
However, we're also seeing Numenor on its like descent into decay and corruption and straying from the faith.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a point in there where Celebrimbor is like, yeah, I'm not going to trust men with what they've got going on right now. So I see it as a both. Like, the elves aren't one to talk, but they're
Mm-hmm.
also not wrong.
Mm. Now, is that because of what we know that happens, or is that because of the past of how they've?
I think it's because of how we've observed like men right now in the
Yeah.
context of the show.
Mm.
In terms of the elves, definitely because of what happened before, we know like they don't really have that much of a leg to stand on.
Yeah. Well, they were, some of them sided with Adar, right? We know that. So.
Well, it's not really that they sided with Adar. It's just that they took Morgoth, and later on Adar. They took elves, and they created them into orcs. So that wasn't like them, but you did have elves of their own accord
Mm,
make decisions against the Valar when they were led by Feanor, the ultimate asshole elf. So,
gotcha.
yeah.
All right. That's fascinating. Like I still find that very interesting for them to be like, hey, we determine who gets it, even though them making the rings in the beginning is what sets off this whole chain of events, which is what they've been manipulated to do by Sauron himself, working right under their noses the whole time, right? So it's their mess that they're making. So I find that very fascinating. But yeah, that is the end of episode 4. We're gonna probably do the next few episodes. Definitely would love to have you back. But before you go, let people know where they can find you.
Yeah, y'all can find me on any social media at Spider Spars. I am a freelance writer for a bunch of websites, but why though, New Arab, um, Nerds of Color YouTube channel. You can find my interviews with the Rings of Power cast. It was really great. And check out my podcast, The Middle Geeks, where we discuss anything and everything in Swan related media.
Awesome. Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. Everybody, don't forget to like, share, comment, subscribe, give us some good reviews. And this will be up on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, anywhere podcasts are found. And the video, if you want to see our pretty faces, it will be up on YouTube. So thank you very much for joining us. And until next time, guys, Salaam, nerds.